Welcome to the session on policing and terrorism. My name is Robbie Friedman. I'm the founding director of the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange at Georgia State University, Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a professor emeritus of criminal justice. My area of interest is terrorism. And I want to start by commending the ICT and Professor Ganor their persistence in carrying out and hosting this important conference. I believe I've attended 12 of these 15, and I sort of compared this to the IACP. It was 25,000 people, and these are the two extremes. The ones in the middle I like less. This is great. We have an impressive panel of speakers today. Each will have a different perspective on law enforcement and counter-terrorism issues. And each one will have between 15 and 20 minutes. Given that there are 6 of us, that will give us around 45 to 60 minutes for Q&A. At the end, I'm known for making the following statement, that yes, it is a workshop, but if you have a comment to make sure it has a question mark at the end. We've been to a couple of sessions where one person makes a comment and takes over some of the presentations of the comments along with the presentations of the panelists. So I hope we'll have a productive and fruitful discussion. Again, welcome to this session. I will introduce the speakers as we go along with some order, and what I'd like to do, with your permission, is go ahead and start, if I can. Okay.
Excuse me.
It worked fine a minute ago. Oh, it's okay. It's on. Good. Thank you. What I'd like to do is talk about the bark and the bite. And the cliche is that barking dogs don't bite. And I beg to differ with that. I think that they bite very seriously, and I want to show the linkage between the two. When we talk about terrorism, and you've heard it in quite a number of presentations from yesterday and the day before, we're talking about the formal, the informal, the group, the state, the individual actor. I tend to divide terrorist activities into 2 types. It's the terrorist-inspired and the terrorist-initiated. And the terrorist-inspired is what is, for lack of a better term, is called a lone wolf. Director Comey of the FBI likes to call them lone rats. So I don't know if that helps us understand who they are better. But I want to show you a few cases, and let's see if there's a pattern there. So, for example, in 1990, there was a prescription for drug for depression, and that was the explanation of the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahana, who at that time was considered a victim of a regular homicide, not of a terrorist attack. 91, there was a robbery gone wrong, the murder of Makeen Morkos in Sydney, Australia. In 94, there was a road rage, the killing of a random Jew on the Brooklyn Bridge. In 97, many enemies in his mind. The shooting murder atop the Empire State Building. 1999, a suicide of a distressed pilot with personal problems. The downing of Egypt Air. By the way, on that one, I had an argument with, at that time, the head of intelligence at the FBI. We were on a panel together. And he said that after 9/11, that case was reopened and still was deemed a suicide. And I said that I'm not a psychologist, but the definition of a suicide is if a single person takes his own life, not when you take 300 people with you. So if that was the case, that is at the very least homicide. I think it was an act of terrorism, definitely an inspired one. In 2000, there was a traffic incident, and that was an attack on the bus of Jewish school children in Paris. 2002, a work dispute, the double murder of LAX. That gentleman apparently had an issue with his boss. So in order to resolve that little conflict, he went to the El Al counter at LAX and shot some people, and luckily an off-duty security officer managed to overcome him. In 2002, there was a stormy family relationship, and that's the Beltway sniper, if you know that interesting story. 2003, an attitude problem. This was Hassan Karim Akbar's attack on fellow soldiers, killing 2, and that's not the only one. We have a few other cases like that. In 2003, mental illness, the mutilation murder of Sebastian Selam. In 2004, the loneliness and depression, the explosion in Brescia, Italy, outside of the McDonald's restaurant. 2005, the disagreement between a suspect and another staff member. It's nice to have these laundered terms for each one of these. An animus towards women. It's a reason to kill women, right? His recent arranged marriage may have made him distressed or stressed. Even non-arranged marriages might make somebody distressed, but between that and starting killing people, that's quite interesting. 2009, an individual act of violence should not attribute the officers killed to the Islamic faith, which is a pattern that comes back time and again. It's basically an individual problem. It is perceived and defined as something in the head of the individual. Now, the sort of a key case and a very important case is the one of Nidal Hassan, and that's the Fort Hood shooting, and that's why I sort of put the Fort Hood in more large letters. And that was, anybody knows how is that defined today? That's exactly right. It's still not defined as an act of terrorism. There are several political reasons for that. One of them is that way you don't have to pay money to the victims. But the fact of the matter is that the credo, the manifesto of Nidal Hassan was in the form of a PowerPoint presentation on the web well before that incident, and his correspondence and communications were known, and yet there was nothing done about it. And then, of course, the New York 2010 Times Square, it was evacuated due to the Taliban bomb plot. 2 bombs in 2013. 2 lone wolves attacks killed 2 police officers, and we have quite a number of those. 2014, radicalized Islamic convert charged at 4 NYPD officers with a hatchet. Between 2010 and 2015, these were just selected cases, and I didn't even include the case of Ilan Khalimi in Paris. But between 2010 and 2015, there were numerous attacks by cars, ramming pedestrians, stones, Molotov cocktails, knifings, etc. in Israel. And they are not considered as serious, quote unquote, as a bus exploding or a coffee shop or a hotel exploding, but they are done almost on a daily basis. Around the world, between 2010 and 2015, about 30 attacks a month of shootings, bombings, car bombs, suicide bombings, etc. And of course, among the latest one is the killing of the soldiers in the recruitment office in Chattanooga. I don't know if you're familiar with this case, but there was a guy by the name of Salman Anur Hussain in Canada, in Ontario, who had a website, and he says the website was called, by the way, filthyjewishterrorist.com, and the commissioner of the OPP actually indicted him for incitement for genocide, and he fled fled the country. Not sure where his whereabouts are. So we talked about inspired acts of terrorism, and aptly named Inspire magazine by Al-Qaeda. And unfortunately, I do not have the latest version, issue number 14, because that picture did not load here. That one is dedicated to assassinations. The number 13 was dedicated to hijackings. This one is for assassination. And of course, the Islamic State's Dabiq magazine, The Laws of Allah, or The Laws of Man. Obviously, this is not a question. It is quite obvious where they're going. So here are a few observations. Terrorism begins with an introduction of hate, almost in the same way that in military training you learn how to attack your enemy, and not necessarily by hate, but by focusing on an outside threat. Okay? The goals of terrorism are quite explicit, and particularly so by the Islamist terrorists more now than ever before. And somebody mentioned in the conference, and I fully agree, even the Nazis were not exactly proud of what they have done, at least not for outside consumption, and they tried to even hide what they did towards the end of the war. Not the case here. So counterterrorism is not just the means to combat terrorists, but it seems that the true counterterrorism is disrupting the ecosystem that allows that inspiration to then result in that kind of an outcome. So what are the implications for law enforcement, since this is the session that we are having? So it seems to me that the policing counterterrorism agenda needs to address incitement in order to attenuate its impact on recruitment and operations. Number two, we need to address the narrative that supports terrorism. Terrorism is not an incident out of the blue. It may sound like that because when we see the marathon bombing, you see thousands of people running and there's suddenly a bomb. But that bomb didn't explode suddenly. There was a plan, there was a purpose, and they could have been actually a possibility of tracking that before it happened. Need to focus on radicalization agents, create enhanced intelligence sources, foster community partnerships, and initiate innovative, proactive projects, and demonstrate intolerance to incitement. I do not believe that we have shown enough objection and lack of tolerance to that kind of narrative. We sort of say, oh, it happens someplace else, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, even if it's directed against us, it's enough to see the language of the Iran deal that says, oh, we only focused on the nuclear bomb. We're not focusing on anything else, even if we're called Great Satan. So, the question is, do we really need to reinvent the wheel? And I would suggest that we don't have to do that, even though we have a tendency to always come up with new names, new acronyms, but that's really not the case. What I like to suggest is to use community policing as a public health model. And what this means is we look at usually how to handle crime, and in this particular private case, terrorism, after it happens. I would like to suggest that we look at it as a factory that we wanted to produce less of it. And the best analogy I can use is the emergency care that you give in a hospital, whether it's a heart attack or a vehicular accident. In all likelihood, if you're there in a timely fashion and the technology is there, not only that you'll be saved, but probably your quality of life will be even better. But that is not the way to deal with the epidemiology of cardiovascular diseases. And by the same token, that is not the way to deal with terrorism, because you always deal with the outcome, not with what produces it. So if we adopt that, the intent is indeed to focus less on that. Boaz Ganor is known to have made a couple of important statements. One of them is his definition and the revised definition of community policing. The other one is actually that you need a network in order to beat a network. But I would like to offer a definition that I came up with in 1992. It's the first definition of community policing. And I want to show you how at that time, when I was thinking about community policing, this language actually fits the fight against terrorism to the letter. So community policing is a policy and a strategy aimed at achieving a more effective and efficient crime control, replace that with terrorism, reduce fear of crime, and it's okay because we need to reduce the fear of terrorism, improved quality of life, improved police services and police legitimacy through the proactive reliance on community resources that seeks to change crime-causing conditions. In this case, terrorism-inspired or terrorism-causing conditions. This assumes a need for greater accountability of police, greater public share in decision-making, and greater concern for civil rights and liberties. That's usually a concept that is either totally ignored or takes over and then prevents security from happening, particularly in the West and even more so in the United States. So what I want to show is the commonality between community policing and Homeland Security, because unfortunately, after September 11, Homeland Security paradigms have sort of taken over, and the community policing paradigm that persisted since the middle 80s of the previous century have been sort of shoved aside, and I would say shoved aside physically because the budgets, the grants, went over to counter-terrorism measures, not to community policing efforts, and followed the money, and the money wasn't there. So both community policing and Homeland Security need to use information gathering as a preventive tool. Okay? They emphasize cooperation between local, state, and federal agencies, and I would even add international agencies. It's becoming more critical than ever before. Work to build successful community partnerships. There's a tendency to sort of be very myopic and very territorial. And I would actually give an example from Israel. Many agencies around the world allow the Israelis for the smooth cooperation that is almost literally online from the intel to the launching of a missile. Sometimes the difference is 30 seconds. That was not born, and it's not innate, and it's not in the DNA. It was arrived at after many, many years of turf battles between various agencies, and that understanding of the need to cooperate evolved through a great deal of organizational struggles. So if it happened in such a small country, there's very little wonder that there are tensions between the CIA and the FBI, and between the FBI and the NYPD, and the NYPD representative is actually in this room. Because agencies want to have credit for what they do. And I think that it's not simply the need to cooperate, but it is the need to cooperate with the understanding that there is an objective that is larger than what a single agency can do. If you look today at the FBI, the Secret Service, when they go to local agencies, they say, we need to rely on your information to bring it to us so that we can handle it. Sometimes that information doesn't come back and that tension still persists. But the partnerships are a key measure in effective community policing and Homeland Security. Need to utilize both proactive and reactive measures. We can't say that we're in a counter-terrorism seminar and only when we finish it, we'll send the special forces to deal with a takeover. So the reactive measures still need to be there. But the proactive measures need to be there as well, and in this case I must commend the UK for what they have done, both with the royal wedding and with the Olympics in 2012. Both of them were threatened by radical imams like Chuderi and others, and both of those events went flawlessly well, and that took a great deal of behind-the-scenes effort in order to make that happen. And I would even say against all odds. So that's quite important. It's important to design to thwart serious crime and terror. It's not always possible to bring somebody to court in time with evidence. And by the way, one of the things that the British police or the Met Police and others did at the time is disrupt, and the Secret Services in the UK did, is disrupt active plans, and that helped a great deal. Very important to aim to enhance public safety. I remember well prior to the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta, I recommended to the security planners to have public service announcements to say, you know, if you see something suspicious, call your nearest police officer or share that information. And I was told that that's unacceptable. Why? Oh, that will put panic in people. I said, panic them, not in the negative sense of the term. These are your best partners. If they don't know what to do and if they don't know what to suspect, we're going to lose that battle. If you go now to the airport in Atlanta, you will hear the messages. If you see anything suspicious and your package is not, or you see something unattended, please call your nearest officer. So this is now years after that event. So, in addition to, or as part of, the prevention and attenuation efforts, I think that the need to be beyond the police, even if the police should lead them, and by police I'm talking generally about public safety officials, there need to be public campaigns against incitement. We somehow learn to live with incitement as if it is a disease that is contained and we either wish it away or we don't think about it or it doesn't affect us, but it affects people. And that incitement needs to have the public condemnation that it is unacceptable. There need to be campaigns against recruitment because these kinds of magazines are not directed at somebody who lives in a tent in a desert or in a cave in Afghanistan or someplace. It is directed against university students and high school students in the United States and England and other places, and they are as well edited and graphically designed as any magazine that you would have. I don't believe that we have enough clear-cut condemnations by civic and political leaders. There's always the lip service, and you hear that, but I would say that to date, for example, from within Islamic sources, and I'm talking about the leadership, varied as it is, there has not been a single unequivocal condemnation of September 11. The atrocity of September 11, not the date. And I'm saying that because there have been numerous condemnations, each one with an exit strategy. The minute you add the word but, or that you have to understand the background of why they did that, that's actually a justification of the act. It's not a condemnation of it. Police are almost alone. And today in the United States, there's a tremendous anti-police sentiment. Some people tend to say because of Ferguson, and I would say because of the outcome of Ferguson, and that is the political leadership at the mayoral and even presidential level that incite divisiveness in the community and make law enforcement far more difficult than it needs to be. As if the police officers are the culprits rather than the saviors, if you will, of the society. And it was not gone unnoticed when NYPD officers have turned their backs on the mayor. I'm not getting into the union disputes there and all that. Very important to use the legal system to prosecute incitement. I'm saying it's important, I'm not saying it's easy. And the reason it is not easy is that in the United States, at least, you need to have three elements, and I have about 2 minutes and I'm done. You have to have three elements in order to prove that there is incitement to genocide or to killing. You have to have the immediacy, the likelihood, and of course now I'm stuck with the third one, that event will actually happen. So it's not enough to say that you're going to, and specificity, thank you. You cannot just say you don't like a group of people. If I don't threaten specifically Shaike, that means that I'm just threatening a group and he himself is not in danger. So, and if he's in danger, how likely is it that I will carry out a threat against him? Okay? And how immediate is it? If we apply these criteria of the Supreme Court, think about the beer hall in Munich in 1932, 1933. that would not have been incitement, because it was not likely, it was not immediate, it was not specific. And yet it ended up with the biggest killing and murderous machine in industrial history. So I think that we make our lives a bit too easy by avoiding the difficult part of using the legal tools in our favor. And in that case, I actually commend the former commissioner of the OPP, Julian Fantino, for initiating that injunction and an indictment against the guy who said, kill them all, kill them now. And it was apparently specific enough for the Canadians. So with that, I'll thank you. It's my information up here if you want to contact me. And with that, okay, let me go and introduce our next speaker. And that will be Deputy Commissioner Catherine Byrne. She is a career police officer, having joined the police force at the age of 19. Her career has covered all areas across the New South Wales police force, including general duties, detectives, specialists, and corporate areas. She's having formal qualifications that include a Bachelor of Arts degree from, am I pronouncing it correctly, Macquarie University, an honors degree in psychology from the University of New South Wales, for which she received the University Medal, and a Master's of Management from the University of Technology. In 2013, Deputy Commissioner Byrne was also awarded an honorary Doctor of Letters from Macquarie University in recognition of contribution to the New South Wales community. Deputy Commissioner Byrne is also a graduate of the FBI National Executive Institute in 2014, and additionally, in 2014, she successfully completed the ANZPLS Police Leadership Strategy.
Very much. Thank you, Denis, actually, for inviting me to come and speak today. I was coming to the conference anyway, so that was just a bonus. So I'm really just going to give an outline of what we're facing in Australia, particularly Sydney, New South Wales, and it's probably a bit more operationally based to what we've been hearing and listening over the last few days of the conference. But it's important for us, or for me, to talk about it, because it's indicative of the environment that has even come to our shores. And clearly Australia, no, somebody thought I came from Austria. It's not Austria, it's Australia. It's a long way away, and and I'm not from New Zealand either. Someone thought I was from New Zealand. And I know we're a long way away, but the similarities are pretty eerie, particularly if you heard Richard Walton's his presentation the other day. So with Australia, as you know, we've got a population of just under 24 million, but we're we're the largest island in the world, the smallest continent. And when you compare it to Israel, for instance, Israel is about 373 times smaller than our landmass. So when people say to me, are you going to go and visit Jerusalem? And you know, it's just an hour down the road. That's really hard for me to grasp. That's unbelievable, and it's one of the great advantages and beauties of Israel and Europe, etc. Is distance. Because if I say I'm going to go from our east coast, Sydney, to our west coast, Perth, and I'm going to drive, that's 41 hours in a car to take that trip. So it's a long way. Even in a plane, it's many hours. So it's a big place. Most of us live on the coast, though. I know our Prime Minister has just said we're going to take 12,000 Syrian refugees, which is good. We should be taking refugees in our country. And even though it's a very big country, most of it is uninhabitable. So we've got to put everybody on the coast where we are. In our country as well, clearly we come from a British colonisation, but we have a rich and wide Aboriginal culture. Aboriginal people were, we can probably trace them back 40,000 years. But Christianity is our religion of dominance. Probably 61% of Australians are Christians. In our census, 2.2% follow Islam and 0.5% Judaism. So that just gives you some idea of our demographic mix. In terms of counter-terrorism, we have national arrangements in place. We have six states, 2 territories, but each state is responsible for counter-terrorism. So we don't have a national response. So me, as Deputy Commissioner in New South Wales, that's my responsibility, counter-terrorism. I guess what we're seeing now is what we call the new normal, and it's pretty much the environment that people have been speaking about over the last few days. So for us, we think, as part of law enforcement, we have a huge responsibility now in terms of national security. So just in terms of the CT environment, prior to 9/11 in Australia, for us, terrorism was pretty much motivated by international conflict, which wasn't related to us in any way. Targets were international interests in Australia or Australian interests overseas. We did have some terrorists trained in Australia, but that was to attack overseas, and we didn't have any specific terrorism legislation. So since 9/11, a lot changed. We had the Bali bombings in 2002 and 2005, where many people lost their lives, Australians included. In 2002, 202 people lost their lives and 88 were Australian. That was when it really hit us for the first time, and a lot of new structures were put in place, counter-terrorism arrangements to enhance intelligence agencies, security and law enforcement all working together. Co-located in joint counter-terrorism teams. We got counter-terrorism legislation, and we started to actually realise that we weren't immune from what was happening. Between 9/11 and September 2014, which is a year ago, and the significance of that date I'll talk about soon, but we had approximately 4 terrorist events in Australia between that time. So in 13 years, and they were either attempts to attack, they were thwarted, or they were terrorism arrests, and they were Jamaat Islamiyah inspired, Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab. September 14 was our game changer, and it was pretty much then what was happening around the world because of IS, Caliphate, etc. We started to see a lot more activity on shore. So whereas most of the people that we had an interest in had shown or demonstrated some intent or desire to do an attack, it now started to become very serious, and they started to develop the capability as well. So that's probably what changed, and we were seeing a lot more people doing that. So our ASIO, which is our Security Intelligence Organisation, advised that we should lift our threat level in Australia to high. It had been medium since 2001, and high means an attack is likely. So it was raised in September last year, and that's where it remains. So since we had 4 prior to last year, since last year we've had 8 terrorist incidents in Australia, 6 attempts and 2 attacks. And so we're saying we've got a terrorist incident now on average every 6 weeks. In Australia, we have 20 listed terrorist organisations, and only one of them is not Islamist. And we now have 54 national anti-terrorism laws that have been enacted, including powers such as preventative detention, which since September last year we've actually used for the first time to detain people on suspicion that they may have been going to do an attack on our soil. We think over 150 Australians have gone offshore to fight. It's probably a lot more. We stopped 2 more at the airport last night. I was reading the briefing note this morning, so there were 2 more that we've stopped, and we're pretty much stopping them regularly, several a week, and as young as 14, wanting to go off and join IS. out of that we know, we've had 35 Australians killed in Syria and Iraq, and we've had 30 return from fighting, but many of those that were there and returned prior to us listing IS as a terrorist organisation. But they are back in the country and of a concern to us. We have put people before the courts. We've disrupted people through facilitation networks. One man is before the court at the moment. We've charged him with facilitating the travel of 7 people, although we think it's a lot more. 3 of those people have been killed in Syria. One has come back and the others are still there. We did a major arrest in September last year, the operation where we were monitoring a core group of extremists who clearly wanted to do an attack. What they were planning, though, was clearly, as time grew on, was clearly becoming unmanageable. They wanted to get explosives and they wanted to attack our military base. And we saw them doing their reconnaissance. They got passes. We were doing quite a lot of work on them. They realised that they just couldn't manage that. They couldn't really source the materials for explosives. So quite rapidly it evolved from that to an instruction from Syria from one of the main people in Jabhat al-Nusra on this occasion, saying, well, you've got to do something, just go and grab somebody off the street now and behead them, wrap them in a flag, IS flag, and send it overseas. So we had to act straight away, and this is the dilemma that Richard spoke about and others. We acted before we had enough evidence. So it was a disruption strategy. Unfortunately, we only put a handful of them before the courts, but along the way we've been gathering more evidence. So there are now 12 of them before the courts, but it's not the preferred position for us. Another example, we got some information on 2 people who were really low priority. We wouldn't have been looking at them. We got some information from our offshore partners, so we started to look at them more closely. That was on a Friday. We were just developing it, and on the Tuesday we got information to say they were about to do the attack right now. So we only had a matter of hours to prevent something from happening. We had them under surveillance. We saw them go to a shop. They bought a knife. They went back to their home. At that point, we were trying to scramble to get our tactical operations people in so that we could arrest them. We did go in, and they had just finished filming their video with the knives and all the gear, saying this is what we're about to do. So fortunately, at that occasion, we got some great evidence, but we prevented that. So we've also had we've also seen the lone wolf or the lone rat. We had a Melbourne man who came to the police station to be interviewed by joint counter-terrorism officers. He pulled out a knife, stabbed them both, and one of them shot him and killed him. And of course we also had the Martin Place siege just before Christmas in Sydney last year, where we had a man by the name of Monette who went into the Lint Cafe on a Monday morning about 8:30, sat down, had a cup of coffee, had a cake, called the manager over, pretty much said, go and lock the doors. The manager said, well, I'm not going to do that. He stood up, he got a sawn-off shotgun out of his backpack and said, well, I'm going to take you all hostage. I have an IED strapped to me. And pretty much that was that. And then over 17 hours, we attempted to negotiate with him. Initially, we saw some of the hostages standing up against the glass wall holding the black flag with the Shahada. It was as close as he could get to an IS flag. It wasn't an IS flag. And he started to get demands out, and the demands were he wanted to speak to our Prime Minister. He wanted us to give him an IS flag, and he wanted to have every media outlet declare that Australia was under attack from Islamic State. We continued negotiations, and along the way some of the hostages got out, which was good for us. It meant we had less of a risk. And unfortunately, there was a point in time where we had to go in and act, and we lost 2 hostages. He killed one, he shot one in the back of the head, and that's when our tactical police went in and they killed him, and unfortunately another of the hostages was killed with shrapnel. Interestingly, at the time we assessed it under our arrangements as a terrorist event, and we operated accordingly, and that gave us terrorism powers that we would otherwise not have had. So we were able to actually pretty much lock down areas because we didn't know who it was for the first 6-7 hours. We were able to lock down areas. We had suspects. We were able to stop people without reasonable cause to suspect and search for anything that might help, because clearly we were saying this was a terrorist attack. Two things of interest. Social media impacted us. He refused to negotiate directly with us. Radio and television refused to give him the voice he was trying to get through them. So he just communicated and put his demands on the hostages' social media Facebook pages. So very, very quickly there were lots of their Facebook pages with his demands and various other messages which were distressing. And we also had one of our infamous Australian exports, Mohammed Elamar, who's recently been killed in a drone strike. He was in Syria tweeting as the siege was underway. So he was putting tweets out saying, this is great, you can bring Sydney to its knees, etc., etc. So two things that we hadn't experienced. De Beek claimed Monette later. They pretty much gave him a whole couple of paragraphs in their next edition, as did Inspire. Several months later, we have an inquest into the matter. We had 4 terrorist experts come and talk about whether or not this was a terrorist incident, whether or not Monette was a terrorist. They can't agree. Nobody can agree whether he was or it wasn't, whether he was had mental health problems, whether he was own agendas. It probably doesn't really matter. It does matter for insurance purposes, but we've already declared it a terrorist act for insurance purposes so that we can make sure everybody is compensated properly. But there is this debate about whether or not it really was an IS terrorist event. So we'll see what comes out of that. Interestingly, what we also then put in a major high visibility policing operation, which we called Hammerhead, because we'd seen an increase in bias crime, particularly towards the Muslim community leading up to this, and we thought we needed to be out to prevent it. So we put a lot of people out and about, very visible on our public transport system, intelligence base, police everywhere. We needed to get some public reassurance, and we really thought there would be a backlash. There was no backlash. There was absolutely nothing. All that we ended up seeing was a field of flowers in Martin Place, and it grew and grew and grew. And there was a hashtag I'll Ride With You campaign. A whole range of things came out which just showed this unity and solidarity that we weren't expecting, but we were relieved that that's what happened. But it might also indicate some hope and some positivity about what we're actually faced with. Our our Grand Mufti came out as well and said some really good words of solidarity. So what does that mean for us? Well, probably what it means for everybody else here. We're trying to deal with it. The operational tempo is exhausting for us at the moment. We've just allocated 50 new people to our terrorism unit. We're working on jobs all the time. We're still monitoring those people who've come back. Clearly the model we're operating under will not be sustainable because we're talking about a long-term matter. So we are now having a rethink about how we're going to actually sustain this. Do we need other legislation to help? Is that the answer? But we do know 2 things clearly. Community engagement is absolutely critical. We already have a community contact unit in place who has already been doing a lot of work with the community before this, so we have good relationships, although they are very tense and fractured at the moment. But we are working with the Australian government on improving that relationship. But we know that we can't do it alone. That this is about a community. This is really about the Muslim community in Sydney getting together. one of our sheikhs that we speak to a lot, who's very well regarded, he says that they're doing a lot of work. They just don't come out and herald it and trumpet it. They're doing an enormous amount of work, and if they weren't doing the work that they'd been doing, he says that 1,000 more Australian youth probably would have been trying to get out of Australia to go and fight. So again, we're not immune from that environment of the radicalised youth becoming younger and younger and younger. We've put a 14-year-old before the court for a terrorism-related offence, and we've had several in our schools come under notice for terrorist-related activities. So where are we now? Well, we're still trying to work out what we're going to do, but we understand social cohesion is the core. Our solution isn't a law enforcement solution. We're not going to arrest our way out of this. And police shouldn't be the lead. We should really be, we are preventers because we work with the community, we are responders, but this is not a police or law enforcement lead. We will help and we will contribute, but as some of the presentations over the last few days, this is about families, this is about our social services agencies and other people coming together under a social cohesion banner. In terms of us trying to counter the violent extremism that we're seeing, we're probably a little way behind. We have ad hoc programs. We don't have a consistent program. We're piloting one at the moment, which is similar to the UK Channel program, and time will tell about how we move on there. But I guess it's pretty much the same that you're faced with in your countries around the world, and we see us now as the lessons that we have seen. Clearly, we are not alone. Clearly, terrorism, it's a global phenomenon, and even though once we could say this is not a matter for us, it clearly is a matter for us, and the Australian government has become very much involved in the matter. And they just announced yesterday that they will join in airstrikes in Syria. So we are now a part of it all. Some of the things that we have learnt over the last year, though, has been encouraging for us. One that I mentioned, our community is cohesive and it is resilient, so we will get through. And the other thing is that our police force is capable and is also resilient. And we've seen that particularly after Martin Place, because Martin Place to a lot of other countries might seem not a big deal. It was an event that deeply affected our community, and it was seen as a big deal. But our police force, I believe, responded as well as they possibly could be, and that's because of a lot of the preparation that had gone into it. Clearly, as I say, community engagement is critical. And last, collaboration, whether it's on us in our states and territories, our partners, particularly Indonesia, and around the world. So that genuine collaboration is going to get us all through. So summits like this are absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker this morning is Chief Michael Coan. He is the chief of the New York State Metropolitan Police Department. Is a law enforcement executive with 33 years of experience with the NYPD and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Police Department. He has in-depth experience in crisis management, risk and security assessment, facility safety and protection, emergency preparedness, response, and media relations. He's currently charged with the safety and security of the two largest railroad agencies in the United States, the Long Island and Metro North Railroads, encompassing 47 square miles in New York and Connecticut. He's accountable for the security of 300 stations and facilities, including Grand Central Terminal and Penn Station. Supervises 800 uniformed and support staff personnel, is overseeing all operational and administrative functions of the department, including crime strategies, intelligence gathering, counter-terrorism measures, investigations, media relations, capital projects, and recruitment. He coordinates with law enforcement and government representatives from DHS, TSA, NSA, NYPD, FBI, Secret Service, and Amtrak, over 50 county and town police departments, federal, state, and local elected representatives.
4,700 square miles.
What did I say?
4,700.
Add 2 zeros, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And while I find my PowerPoint, when I'm finished, I'm going to ask a question. And then if you get the answer right, I'm going to give out a hat. Okay? And that didn't do anything. Here we go.
Should be down here.
Down here. Right. There we go. No, one more. One more.
One more.
There we go.
Oh.
No? See, I didn't do that.
No, it's okay.
That was you?
My fault.
Try that one more time. There we go. Okay. You already know who I am, so we'll just go on. I'll leave this hat with you, Dennis. It's not yours, though. So, very pleased to be here. I also was invited by Denis, and I kind of jumped at the opportunity to do it. It's been quite a week. This conference is basically a global view on terrorism. My perspective is much more narrowly focused. As mentioned, I did 27 years with the NYPD, the last 7 years with the MTA Police, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Police. So I'll present counterterrorism policing, our security strategies as we deploy them in my department. As we've seen here this week, terrorism constantly evolving. So the strategies to combat them must also evolve. Post 9/11, law enforcement, we prepared for large-scale attacks. We still prepare for those. However, as mentioned in the seminar yesterday, we've adjusted it and to address potential lone wolf, lone rat attacks as we've moved forward. 9/11 was a wake-up call, a term that I've heard here a few times this week. In my 34 years in law enforcement, nothing impacted how we police more than acts of terrorism. On the opening day of this conference, Minister Gallant, he put it very, very succinctly. When in friction, you find antidotes. I stole a bunch of quotes. I'm going to bring them back to New York, and that was one of the quotes that I thought was very on point. Over the last 14 years, we've been searching for the antidote. I'm not going to present any solution today. We don't know when or where an event may occur. We do not know if it's going to be a large-scale, small-scale, biological, or a chemical attack. Therefore, we prepare and respond to any one of these potential scenarios. And as a reminder, we must do it under the rule of law, another phrase that you've heard here this week. In addition, another phrase that is applicable, we police in a system of liberal democratic values. So what does that mean to me, to the police? In the United States, particularly in New York, people want to go about their business with a minimum amount of disruption. What I've found, people want security, but they want it to affect everybody else. Stop the other guy. Don't stop me. So I said earlier, we don't know where or when or what type of event may happen, but one thing I'm certain. If all else fails, if a terrorist plot or a terrorist is not identified, the last line of defense is the local police department. I cannot speak for all law enforcement, but I will tell you what we're doing, the MTA Police, and our strategy. This slide here just shows basically our network. Anybody here have a visit New York? So if you took the subways, trains, buses, if you were late, we're not responsible for that. I just police them. We try to keep you safe. It's the largest transportation network in America. Just quick overview, we provide over 2 billion rides annually. The network spans about 4,700 square miles. My focus is the commuter railroads, but altogether we service the MTA over 14 million people have access to our system in the tri-state area. So we are responsible, as mentioned, for policing the Long Island Railroad, which is not only the largest railroad in the states, it's also the oldest. And Metro North is the second largest railroad in the United States. Not quite as old, it's only 40 years old. So I'll just discuss our policing security strategies as mentioned. I'll touch on the threat outlook, and then I'll talk about how we're prepared and how we respond to incidents and a few incidents that we've recently responded to. A system as large as the MTA, it means shared responsibility. My department polices the railroads, the NYPD polices the subways and buses, a separate MTA police department police our bridges and tunnels. And I've left out the 14 counties and in excess of 50 other police departments and federal agencies that we have to deal with. Some of those you mentioned in the introduction. It's important to note we all share the common goal, safety, security. We all work together. We hear the term collaboration. It's widely used. Law enforcement does collaborate. However, it's a work in progress. I'm not going to kid anybody. The backbone of all police departments is the uniform patrol component. Uniform patrol is the most visible front line of defense. We have over 700 officers dedicated to uniform patrol. Those 700 officers, in addition, we have detectives and some specialty units, all combined with the largest transportation police department in the country. In addition, to my specialty units, we have a specially trained, largest explosive trained canine unit in the country. It's my #1 asset to prevent an explosive device from entering our system or determining that there's a device on our system. My dogs, my canines, we patrol 24 hours, 7 days a week. They're trained in-house. It's recognized as the premier canine unit in the country. When people travel, as we all have, we traveled here, people get careless. People travel on trains, same thing. Each year, we clear over 2,000 unattended bags of packages that people just leave in a station or on a train or on a platform. So my canines, in minutes, they can sweep that bag and we can get the train moving and people don't have to wait. Fortunately, most of those bags are found to be harmless. To get off track when I got to do two things at once here. I have to click and follow where I'm going on my notes. So, in addition, we deploy mobile explosion detection equipment to scan carry-ons. We can't scan every bag. We do random checks as required by law. And we have stationary equipment that monitors airflow for chemicals and biologicals. We perform joint operations with numerous state and local federal law enforcement authorities. And if you're in the police department and or the military, you have to have an acronym for everything. So we have plenty of acronyms, but really what it does, it just reminds us every day of what we need to do. We address the officers. We say there's a MAST, it's a multi-agency super surge. They know what it is. They go out, and we work with other agencies. There's a few pictures here that are taken by the local media. So we perform joint operations with local, state, federal authorities. Crime strategies, they begin with prevention and tracking where and what type of crimes are going to be committed. For counter-terrorism, we utilize intelligence to gather information to address who's trying to harm us and where and how they're going to attack. Our intelligence operations is another example of collaboration. We cannot do that alone. State, local, federal authorities, we use them all. Our latest effort is with the FBI Cyber Crime Unit. We have officers from the MTAPD assigned to the Cyber Crime Unit. In addition, our best asset is the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The New York office of the Joint Terrorist Task Force is the largest Joint Terrorist Task Force in the States. We have 2 detectives assigned there, and they were there pre-9/11, and they've been there since. Again, it's one of our best assets. Training, probably the most important element of our policing and security strategy. Training is evolving just as our strategies evolve. Post 9/11, we began what we call Patriot training. It's a behavior analysis training, And more recently, we've gone to active shooter training. We teach officers how to respond to a spontaneous shooting incident. Years ago, when I first came on the job, they taught you how to isolate and contain an individual with a weapon. Today, officers are trained that they have to engage and engage immediately. The security strategy also includes infrastructure protection. Some of our most notable and busiest locations have been structurally hardened. We use bollards. I see a lot of bollards here in Israel, so you're very familiar with them. We use those to reduce the blast impact from a potential vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. I could do an entire presentation on the difficulty of construction and projects in New York City. Pictured here, we have Grand Central. It's 100 years old. It's a landmark facility. It took us 10 years to get the bollards, to get all the permits, and to get the work done. 10 years to get it around. Probably the crown jewel of New York still took a decade. Penn Station, still not finished. It's one block that's not finished. And I mentioned Grand Central. We finished it. One block we're going to have to rip up in the next 3 years because there's a construction site going on across the street. We'll have to go through the whole process once again. I don't police the bridges, but the bridges have all been structurally hardened in New York City as well, at least the bridges that are owned by the MTA. There are other bridges in New York City, just to complicate things, that are owned by the Port Authority, which is part New York and New Jersey. So it's law enforcement's a little complicated in New York. We've got over 4,000 cameras in use, and every day more cameras are going up. I have an emergency operations center. It's pictured here. All the feeds from all the agencies come into my center. In addition, each agency monitors their own feeds. We share our cameras with other law enforcement. It's a great crime tool. It's great for forensic values. The main agency that we share our cameras with is the NYPD. Pictured here, just an example of how the cameras work. We have point of entry cameras at all the subway stations, and from that, somebody enters the system, they commit a crime, we go back, figure out where they came in, and we can get a nice picture of them. This guy's not wanted, he's actually an MTA employee. We just took a nice picture of him to put him in the presentation. The gentleman over here, though, he was mentioned earlier, Faisal Shahzad, if you recall. He's the man who was responsible, who put a truck-laden bomb in Times Square. Fortunately for us in New York, it did not go off. This case is just a great example of cooperation between law enforcement, private interests, and the forensic values of cameras. Within 5 minutes after he parked the bomb-laden truck, he's caught on a camera in his first picture. It's a private camera. A half hour later, he's caught on camera entering Grand Central Terminal, track 25. The reason he did that is that he had come down the night before, and he parked the getaway vehicle, took the train back. The next day he drives the car down, he leaves the keys to the getaway vehicle in the car. So now he goes back to plan B. He takes our train back. We catch him on camera. He walked there very calmly. This picture just shows him. He did one quick look behind him to see if he was being followed. Gets on a train, and then he gets off the train in Connecticut. You can see an hour and a half later. The next morning, comes back to the same station in Connecticut, buys a ticket. We have a video of him. He very casually walks over, buys a soda, gets a ticket, gets on the train, calmly comes back to New York. We have him walking in Grand Central. He picks up the getaway car, and he goes on his way. Fortunately, he was arrested the next day. By the time he came back in, we already knew who he was. One of my detectives from the Joint Terrorism Task Force was actually on the case. Since my trains go to Connecticut, they put him right on the case, and he was there when they arrested him in the parking lot of JFK. This case, it also highlights our educational campaign, the See Something, Say Something campaign. The MTA began that campaign, and since it's gone national, you hear it everywhere. It's national and international. The gentleman pictured here, he noticed Faisal Shahzad parked a truck illegally, by the way. He's a vendor. Within minutes of the car being parked, he went over to a mounted NYPD cop and said, hey, something's going on with this vehicle. So it's just a great example of multiple law enforcement agencies combined with civilian aid prevented a real tragedy. I know we have a bomb squad expert here, Mr. Horowitz, and he could probably tell you what it was like for the bomb squad to go up to that truck, evacuate Times Square, and to disable that bomb. New York was extremely, extremely fortunate. I don't have specific information, but however, it's clear that mass transit is a target. Last 18 months in the States, the FBI has arrested 50 individuals. The individuals, each one of them has been contacted by a foreign-based terrorist, and they were either interested in or they were beginning the planning stages of attack on U.S. soil. In addition to terrorist plots, a week does not go by somewhere in the United States where we don't have an active shooter incident. I'm certain by the time we go back, I'm going to read about yet another one. They're not always terrorist related, however, a big cause for concern. Mass transit provides a rich environment. It's very difficult to protect. It's a unique opportunity for mass casualties and to cause serious economic implications. So as we prepare to prevent an attack, our enemies are preparing to attack and act out against us. Inspire magazine was mentioned. I think the 14th edition is out now. I believe this was from the 7th issue. It coincided with the 100th anniversary of Grand Central Terminal, and they had a picture taken from inside Grand Central Terminal. We don't know if they were there. We don't know if it was just, they picked it up on the internet. Was it a coincidence that it came out the same month as the 100th anniversary? I doubt it. They do their homework just as we do our homework. So as we prepare to prevent an attack, our enemies are preparing to attack us. This is just an example. It was mentioned yesterday in the cyber unit, in the cyber symposium, that Al-Qaeda is like your grandfather on the internet. Nowadays they're going to Twitter and the dark sites, so it's become more and more difficult to track the individuals. So we have our security strategy. We deploy our resources. We train our personnel. We have our plans in place. Implementation of these plans is the best test of our abilities to respond to unusual or large incidents. Responding to natural disasters or unusual events could be similar how we respond to a terrorist event. Same protocols apply. It's always an evolving process, and it's important to utilize those plans and institute them when necessary. In a system as large as the MTA, you get a lot of unusual incidents. Most recently, pictured up here on the top, on the left, we had a small plane crash onto our tracks. Sunday morning, bright Sunday morning, train crashes. 1 fatality and 1 individual actually survived. We respond along with the Nassau County Police Department. We assume that it's an accident. However, we investigate that thoroughly to determine the cause. Obviously, this is going to draw a lot of attention. It's newsworthy, so it's important to get the information out to the public and to other law enforcement agencies to let them know, was this an accident or was this a deliberate act? Unfortunately, this was just a tragic accident. The right photo was a train that struck a vehicle. The vehicle was stopped between the gates. 6 people were killed. It could have been intentional. It turned out, again, a tragic accident. Pictured on the lower right, a train derailment, which is always a concern with 4,700 square miles of track. In addition to aiding the victims, when we respond to the scene, we immediately look to determine the cause. We're looking for signs of any kind of tampering of the tracks, or is there a device placed on the track. This cause was quickly determined to be excessive speed. Trains, similar to planes, have black boxes on them, and they record all of the train movement. So we prepare to prevent and respond to a terrorist event. We model our response to accidents and unusual events, and in each event we learn from a little more each time during after-action reviews. So to conclude, we know we're a soft target. We're confident of our security strategy. However, we're constantly looking to improve. So now we're going to try to give away the hat. So my question to you is, what keeps me awake at night? What do I see as the biggest threat? Anybody? Possibly. So I look at it as complacency and fatigue. The 14 years after 9/11 in America, in the States, fatigue sets in. Political fatigue, financial support, and publicly. People start to question, why do we need this amount of security? We fight every day to hire more cops, to get more funding, because people just, again, they get complacent. The officers are great, they're on point every day, but if I hire an officer today who's 25 years old, he or she was 11 years old on 9/11. It's an historical event. It's our job, it's my job to constantly remind them, exactly what happened. So my job, along with many others represented here at this conference, to not allow my resources to get sidetracked, not allow the funding to get sidetracked. I have to serve as a constant reminder, and conferences like this help us do that the threat to our freedom and our way of life, that it still exists, that this battle is far from over. Thank you.
What hat?
I knew he was going to steal it.
Thank you very much. Since we're talking about strategies, our next speaker is Chief Superintendent Asher Ben Artzi. He's an associate at the ICT, and he has had 34 years of service with the Israel Police Security Agency, the Shin Bet, and was the Israel National Police. He's the Chief Superintendent when he retired. Has an MA degree in administration from Haifa University. In his tenure with the Israel National Police, he served as Director of Security Department and then the Director of the INTERPOL and International Operations Units. In this post, Asher administered and directed the Israel Police Interpol Division and was responsible for interchange of criminal intelligence with other international police services and with intelligence agencies dealing with drugs and organized crime. Asher, please.
Good morning. לא, את השקף הבודד.
אין בעיה.
Before I start, I must tell you an amazing fact. זה בסדר?
רגע. איך קראת אותנו? Israel Police?
כן, זה כולם.
נחכה, אולי זה יעלה.
לא, אז בואי שימי את זה, כי יש לי את זה פה. זה במצגת. רגע. איפה זה?
הנה, אני פותחת.
Did you get hacked?
הנה, זה נפתח.
אוקיי. זה...
זה בסדר.
בסדר, אוקיי. Well, good morning. As I told you before I start, I wanted to tell you an amazing fact. Some weeks ago, when I opened my ICT bag to prepare, I found that 3 or 4 years ago, I initiated a panel, the challenge of the challenge of illegal immigration for law enforcement agencies. When I brought the idea to Boaz Gano, he told me, "You are an angry prophet. Leave it." But we made it, and Robbie was the chair of this panel. And some of the European agencies who came to this panel, they understood the threat. They believe us, but nothing happened and nothing changed. And yesterday I read a short article in the newspaper that next year Europe is going to get 10 million. Sorry. Yes, 10 million refugees. So, angry prophet maybe, but that's the situation. I wanted to tell you some points, some facts about the Israel police. First of all, we are a national police. We are a very small police, 28,000 police officers, and the structure of the police, you can see the slide, is based upon 7 districts. This slide is a little bit old because we have a new district in Haifa. But the structure of the police contains the border police. The border police, according to our system, to the Israeli system, and you can compare the border police to the Guardia Civil in Spain. You compare the border police to the gendarmerie in France. But according to our system, the border police is a part of the police. The commander of the border police is under the same commissioner like me and like the district commanders, as you can see in the map. You can see that we have mutual borders together with Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. We have some problems of trafficking problems in these borders. We get hash, and heroin from Lebanon. We get heroin from Jordan, and we get, well, it's not exist anymore. We got, until 2 years ago, we got marijuana and women for prostitution from the Egyptian border. And of course, illegal immigrants who came from Africa. About the Egyptian border, we succeeded to stop this illegal trafficking of weapons, refugees, and women, and drugs by building the security fence in our Egyptian border. The problem which we have in the Jordanian border is a little bit more complicated because we get heroin from this side of the border, and the trafficking is made by the Bedouins. And you can find the same tribes in our side and the Jordanian side. And when I say tribe, I mean family. So the same family is sitting in Jordan and in Israel, and they can traffic the drugs, the heroin. Since I retired from the police, I, like a preacher, I preach for cooperation. And if Professor Friedmann remember our illegal immigration panel, I said that we use the cooperation as a tool for fighting criminality. When I say criminality, I can compare the criminality to terrorism, because same roots that the traffickers or the criminals use, same roots are used by the terror. the Bedouins in Sinai who traffics women for prostitution, they traffic also weapons. It was like this until 3 years ago. We succeeded to stop it, but after we stopped in Sinai Desert, we have some other problems, but not for now. We live in a small global village, actually, because everything is small now. No borders. In Europe, there are no borders. Once you arrive from Israel to Cyprus, and it's 30 minutes flight, you are in Europe. And you can be in London in 3 hours, and you can be everywhere. And a criminal who commit a crime in Israel can be in the same day in Europe, and we cannot find him anymore. So we live in a small global village, and we have this tool of cooperation to fight criminality and terror. Actually, this panel, this session, is also a kind of cooperation, because we are sitting here representatives of some law enforcement agencies. You can find here commissioners. You can find here police attaché. You can find here ex-police officers, and this is the beginning of cooperation. Let me tell you some other facts about the Israel police and the cooperation. We cooperate through three major channels. First of all, the INTERPOL. The Israel police is a member in this world agency since 1949. In this organization, you can find something like 190 members. Most of the police agencies in the world are members in this organization. We exchange intelligence information between or among the partners of this organization through the General Secretariat of the Interpol, which is located in Lyon. But some years ago, the General Secretariat recognized the importance of the computer criminality. And since last year, there is a new headquarters in Singapore, the computer headquarters, the cyber headquarters in Singapore, and the Israel police sent a permanent attaché, a police officer, who is sitting there in Singapore in the cyber headquarters. We cooperated a very good cooperation through our agreements with some countries. We are signed on the European Convention for criminal cooperation, and most of the European countries are signed on this agreement. We are signed on different agreements with the US, South Africa, Canada, and Australia. The American-Israeli Convention in the past the extradition was quite limited. The list of the criminal offenses was quite limited. But today, and actually it started 5 years ago, we can extradite from Israel and to Israel. I'm talking about the US. We can extradite on every criminal offense which the punishment is more than 1 year prison. And if I'm talking about the cooperation between us and the American agencies, we cooperate a very good cooperation. And believe me, a very good cooperation with the FBI, DEA, NYPD, of course, the RSO here in the American Embassy, the U.S. Marshal Service for extradition, both sides, of course, and the Secret Service. The American Secret Service for not for the security of the president. Okay, we are not involved in this angle. Our cooperation with the other agencies, as I told you, is first of all it was through the Interpol. Now we have also direct cooperation, as I told you, between us and the American agencies, and we have some other very good cooperation through our police attaché sitting overseas. We have 10 police attaché sitting around the world, and the location of our police attaché is according to the activity of the Israeli criminals abroad. That's why from the 10, 5 are located in Europe. And I can tell you the locations. We have one in Moscow to cover all the territory of the former USSR. We have one sitting in Romania, and he covers the Balkans and Turkey also. We have one in Berlin, and he covers the Central European countries. We have one who is sitting in The Hague, and he covers England also, and the Benelux countries. And we have one who is sitting in Paris in France, and he covers also Spain and Portugal, Switzerland. No one was, in my time, no one was sitting in Cyprus, so I was also the police attaché, the Israeli police attaché for Cyprus. Now they changed the system and someone else covers. We have also 5 are located in Europe. We have one in Washington and 2 police attaché who is sitting in Colombia, and they cover all the South American countries. Asia is covered by our police attaché who is sitting in Bangkok, and he actually covers half the world, from India to the east, including Australia and New Zealand. The last one, our last police attaché, he covers all the African countries who can be covered by us. He is not sitting in Africa, he's sitting in Jerusalem in the headquarters. Another direction of cooperation is through the foreign police attaché who are sitting in Israel. And you can find here some representatives of police, like the Spanish police, the French police, the Russian police, police of Ukraine, You can find here some intelligence agencies, the representatives of intelligence agencies, and we have the connections with also with intelligence agencies, because according to their system, some of them are dealing with organized crime. According to our system, the Israel police is dealing with organized crime, so we cooperate both police agencies and intelligence agencies. Okay, the chair limits me, and I don't want to be longer than now. Okay. So we can finish here.
Thank you, Artzi. Our next speaker this morning is Timothy der Weduwen. I got it. He joined the Netherlands Police in 1987, worked mainly as a commanding officer in the uniformed branches in the cities of Utrecht and Amsterdam. In his career, he successfully approached organized crime from a community policing perspective. I'm particularly happy to see that one, and worked as a precinct commander with challenging immigrant communities. Since 1996, he has been active as a hostage negotiator, first for the Netherlands and later for the United Nations. In 2004, Timo was seconded to the European Union and worked as an executive officer in the EU police mission in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and in the EU border assistance mission to Moldova and Ukraine. In 2006, he joined the United Nations and worked as a security expert in Israel, West Bank, Gaza, and Somalia. Before returning to Israel, West Bank, and Gaza as the chief of the UN Security, he was chief of global training and development for the United Nations Security Management System based in New York. His expertise is police capacity development, international security risk management, police accountability, and hostage negotiation.
I actually wrote that myself. Professor Friedmann, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today, and thank you for coming. I know and I recognize your expertise in the field of law enforcement and counter-terrorism, and I'm always humbled to see so many practitioners and experts around me. I would like to start with complimenting Deputy Commissioner Byrne and Chief Coan for their efforts. I retired as a police officer in 2006, joined the UN, and always when I see my colleagues with the challenges of today with the police colleagues, be it on the tracks of New York and Connecticut or in New South Wales, I'm always regretting that I resigned in a way. But anyway, well done. I used to be a cop in the Netherlands, community policing officer, commanding officer, and I want to tell you why I became a police officer. I'm a failed history teacher. That's why. I graduated in history, my degree, and I couldn't find a job as a teacher, so I joined the police. That's it. And I've never regretted it. The historical perspective on how the Netherlands at this moment, as part of the European Union, combats terrorism is actually something that is not too far in our history, and I want to discuss that with you. I can do it without PowerPoint, Denis. Anyway. And I call it the big fish approach. And we're not going that far. It is an organized crime story which has informed the way law enforcement in the Netherlands is actually working today in dealing with foreign fighters, with youth that is going abroad to do horrible things and come back. But also homegrown terrorist networks that are trying to target the Netherlands, the infrastructure, and the free and democratic society that we have built in the last 500 years. The big fish approach. I'll take you back to 1991. I was a police officer then, so I can still do that. Why I tell this story, I was the chief of staff then of one of the chief constables that was almost lost his job over this. So I have a little bit of a personal perspective. The big fish approach is about accountability and oversight when it comes down to law enforcement. That's also the bridge between organized crime, as my colleague Asja said, organized crime, terrorism, roots, much the same. But accountability and oversight for police must be the same too. We are working under the law, we're not above the law. I have 15 minutes, Professor, right? All right, there I go. Netherlands in the, let me see. Netherlands in the 90s, we had a crime fight between the Chinese networks and Turkish networks about heroin. Heroin came up in the 70s, and it was the big thing in the Netherlands. And it wrecked a part of society. The Dutch law enforcement was not ready for that in the 70s, but in the 80s came to terms, especially with these two big groups. They were connected to the opium fields in Laos and Cambodia, and the opium fields in Turkey, and the import of these drugs was done by these two networks. These networks were more or less neutralized by very effective and hard police work. In the meantime, the Dutch criminals, the petty criminals, saw that there's some profit to be done in drugs, and they started with the home growth of marijuana. And you know our liberal laws when it comes down to soft drugs and hard drugs. Yeah, and I stop explaining it to the world because nobody understands it, not even the Dutch. But so you cannot grow it, but you can sell it, but only if you have a supply of less than 30 grams of marijuana, and then you can carry and use if you have less than 2 grams of marijuana. I'm not getting there anymore. So the home growth of marijuana became big. The king of the home growth, a very violent criminal called Klaas Bruinsma in 1991, was assassinated by some of his colleagues. And that started a new phase of empire. The new drug in the 90s was cocaine. And cocaine came in with a vengeance. And it was, of course, produced. Coke base was produced in Colombia, and actually you could import it pretty smartly, and then you could cut it and refine it at home, and you would make huge profits. Even heroin, marijuana, it was nothing. So the successors in that Dutch crime works, they started looking at Latin America as their source of power, and this was before Colombian networks or South American networks took root into the Dutch criminal society. And as you might know, the port of Rotterdam is the entry point for all imports in the western part of Europe. It's the biggest port in the world, maybe not anymore, but still it's pretty big. And it had a container port. So that was the fun thing for the Dutch criminals. And they started working on bringing cocaine into Europe. The big fish approach, I will not explain how the oversight and accountability of police and state prosecution worked, but there was a bit of independence of the police to say, how do we approach this? How do we gather evidence to make sure that the courts can convict these criminals? And they thought in their strategy, and these strategy meetings were just a group of people with a flip chart thinking, what is the best way? Let's learn from FBI and from our colleagues in the UK and whatever we do. And they said, we need to catch the big fish. If we catch the big fish, then we'll take the little fish out later. Or, as some people say, cutting off the head of the dragon kind of thing. Now you have to think about combating organized crime. How many of us would not like to see Mr. Baghdadi in a court of law, right? And that's the big head of ISIS or Daesh, and then we will rip them apart. And some of the strategies are still there. So there I go. Now to get the big fish, you have to understand that criminal organizations are very closed. They are not recruiting in a newspaper like terrorist organizations are not recruiting in a newspaper. It's a personal approach, and then you are dragged in. Now these criminal organizations, actually was one big with a lot of satellites, was based in old motor clubs, in scooter clubs. And they were also based in hooliganism around soccer matches. This was the recruiting ground of these organizations. Now, to infiltrate an undercover agent, it was very difficult. Because you had to be a hooligan or you had to be having a moped. Well, that's it. Now, the strategy was if we grow an undercover agent that the police controls into the organization, we have to work on credibility, we can collect evidence about the small fish, and we get to the big fish, we arrest the big fish, gone. Good. Catching the smaller fish, we do that along the way. But we keep our eyes on the undercover agent. Are you with me so far? Yes. You're all law enforcement. This is something that you know about. All right. There I go. Oh. The practice. Now, the practice was that it was not possible to infiltrate a police officer, male or female, into these networks. They would have been caught. They would have not had the credibility. So it was decided that a criminal would be recruited to be the undercover agent. And the criminal would then be controlled by the police. And we call that the CUA, the criminal undercover agent. And to grow the criminal undercover agent, of course, some of the criminal acts that the criminal undercover agent had to do need to be condoned. Because to grow someone needs to have credibility. So the criminal undercover agent and the controllers agreed on what is my behavior, criminal behavior, and will I be discharged of any accountability to do that. Now, what happened? This criminal agent was later we found out that there was, of course, double and triple play in place. But all right, I'll give away the ploy. The idea of the police, the crime fighters, was we want to make this criminal agent a major player in that organization. And we do that by making him a producer of coke base. That was a smart ploy. So actually, tax money was used to buy a factory in Colombia. You know, are you kidding me? Yeah? So the Dutch government bought a factory in Colombia. It was not a funny period, I can tell you that. I'm smiling now, but a factory in Colombia, and it was a juice factory. It was a factory where oranges and lemon were used to make juice paste. And juice paste was then frozen, shipped in containers, and in freeze containers, to Rotterdam, and then it can be mixed with water, and then you put it in a carton and you have juice. And I think that even Israeli citrus producers do the same. You condense it and then you do it. Now, coke base was hidden in those frozen juice containers and then smuggled into the Rotterdam port. Now, of course, the coke base needed to be bought, but it also needed to be sold. But to guard the credibility of the criminal undercover agent, the containers full of coke base needed to be, of course, monitored. And this was called, in the methodology, the monitored delivery. So surveillance agents would then follow the container and see where it was unpacked and dispersed in the market. We lost about, I can tell you, 65 containers full of coke base, subsidized by the Dutch government. No, I'm sorry, Professor, but I'm gone. Now, the profits that were made were used by the police controllers of the CUA to increase the credibility. Big cars, Rolex watches, to make sure that he became even more attractive to the big fish. And a strong code of secrecy was kept to guard not only the identity of the criminal undercover agent, but also the whole methodology. So in total, there was a need-to-know basis within the division that was running this operation. So that means there were two controllers, and the two controllers reported directly to the chief of the crime division. And anyone else, so the surveillance officers that needed to follow a container, they knew they needed to follow a container, but they didn't know why at all. So a strict need to know. Now, the reality, this was the practice. A deputy commissioner, as a high-ranking officer, was called in to that crime division, and he looked around and he said, "This is not correct. What are we doing?" Because he did a reality check, and there was a colleague from the Amsterdam police, and the police controllers invested criminal profits in criminal infrastructure. So instead of combating organized crime, we were boosting it. We were making it bigger. 65 containers that were lost. They were just sold as cocaine through Europe. So instead of saying we need to bring that market down, we were bringing it up. The criminal undercover agent personally, on the side, made millions of gulden it's a half a euro, in profit, never to be retrieved. And the worst thing, and then it comes down to oversight and accountability, the state prosecutor, who is in our, you call it an investigative judge, in our system it's called the state prosecutor, it could be like the district attorney in the United States, knew nothing of the arrangements. There was not an endorsement of the one that had to present the evidence to the judge, to the court, to say, how did you actually get this evidence? You're laughing, huh? No, but it's a painful story, actually. Yeah. And the theory, and then we go back to the strategy, the theory of if we grow an undercover agent, then we'll get to the big fish, was never substantiated. We never caught the big fish, ever. They were laughing all the way to the bank. Later, it was found out that the criminal undercover agent also had his controllers on the other side. So this is a real spy story. There's books about this, and big parliamentary inquiries. Now the consequences were the deputy commissioner said this is wrong, and there were two chief constables accountable for that crime division, and one was my direct chief, and he accused the other one of corruption, and then the other one accused, and it was all over in the newspapers. Now can you imagine, Mike, that you will go against and accuse the NYPD chief of corruption, and then he accuses you. It's not done, right? It's horrible. It's the worst thing that can happen to the reputation of law enforcement if colleagues accuse each other. And what happened? Now it led to the parliament. We have a good parliament. It's of course politicians, but they're chosen, they're elected, and they said no more of this. We want to know what happened. So one of the strongest tools of the legislative is a parliamentary inquiry, and that means that the parliament inquiry, if you come before the committee, you have to speak the truth. You don't speak the truth, you go to jail. So everyone came there. The two police controllers were, and it was filmed on TV, and we were all glued to the screen for months. The two police controllers were testifying with motor helmets on their head because they could not be recognized. It was a bit of a theater, but anyway. It led to the dismissals of both ministers of Interior and, thank you very much. I've got 4 minutes, but I'm almost done. It led to the dismissal of the Minister of Interior and the Minister of Justice. And new legislation, and this is my bridge to terrorism. Discipline and oversight of the police. This never happened again. So the freedom of the police needed to be reined in by a state prosecutor, and now we have a committee that says if you want to do something to bring the terrorists or the criminals in, you have to come to the committee and we'll say if you can do it or not. So there's oversight. There is accountability. The whole echelon of police chiefs that grew up in the heroin time in the 70s was more or less removed in 5 years' time. So the perspective of we can do what we want because we're the police was removed. And limitation in crime investigative methods. Now it means that we are not doing any undercover work anymore. Also not with terrorism. A little bit. But it's judged, it's tested, and we never use criminal. The Netherlands is the country that uses the most of telephone taps in the whole of Western Europe. because that was a proven method. And fortunately, our criminals are still so stupid to have this on in their pockets, and we use that a lot. Now, conclusion, and I've got 2 minutes left. A normative framework for combating organized crime is now in place, and that normative framework has been transponded to the way we look at terrorists. Decision-making, accountability, oversight, I said enough on this, but community policing, and I'm going back to Professor Friedmann, is the cornerstone of the approach. If you don't have a relationship, you cannot do any business. So that means that in line with the approach of the MTA, we have now a very, very active relationship with our civilian population, immigrant communities. We just walk, patrol officers, we go to meetings, we hold their hands, we know their names. We're a small country, we're 17 million, so we can all know all these names. We've got 65,000 police officers. 40,000 of those are on the streets. So we make sure that we know. And people call us. We have succeeded that way in... I was the leader of that enterprise, to taking away a big weapons exporter and seller that sold to fanatical groups, to criminal groups, and this is just the way. He was a barber somewhere in the back of a shop, and on the side he sold submachine guns. And very closed, but because of community, because they were just taking note of license plates and whatever it is, we could actually get to the guy and his group. Disruption and prevention is our best weapon. We need to be there before stuff happens. Now that means that we have to be creative. Arresting our way out of this, and I thank you, I'm going to use that quote with your permission, is not going to help us anywhere. We have to be there. Now, this conference helps us to come to those strategies. Not the big fish. All right, it's nice if we catch a big criminal, big terrorist, and we bring them to justice. That's what we do. But before that, 90% of our work is prevention, disruption, knowing our communities, and guarding these young people that are just confused about a lot of things. And we have to help them make sense of what democracy means, what freedom means, what making your own choices means. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
There may be some old people who are confused, not just young ones, and this gives a whole new meaning to taking the high ground.
It's a good script for a movie.
It's a very good script for a movie. Last but not least is my co-chair for this session, and we have been doing this Dog and Pony show for about 9 years by now. Denis Monette. Always reminds me of that Blazing Saddles movie, or maybe another movie. He is the chairman of STARCOM, which is Stop Terrorism, Aggressive Response, Coordinated Operational Management, and he is a former Assistant Commissioner of Police in Nassau, New York. Former Assistant Commissioner is the New York Assistant Commissioner. Denis Monette currently serves as the chairman. Denis, you wrote this twice.
I didn't write it. I didn't even know you had it.
Okay. STARCOM is a multi-agency Homeland Security and Counter-Terrorism task force. The STARCOM task force is comprised of local, state, federal, and private security agencies in the United States, and it has been deemed a best practice by the United States Department of Homeland Security. You're in for a great presentation. Denis, please.
Good morning. Thank you all. I'm going to be all over the map. I'm going to go very fast. You might like some of the things I say, might not like the others. If you like what I say, tell all your friends and all your colleagues and all your associates. If you think I'm a jerk and you don't like it, just keep it to yourself. So that being said, I just want to... I've rewritten my notes 3 times since I got here on Sunday, and I think with good reason. I want to first acknowledge 2 people in here. Number one, if you don't know, Mr. Stephen Stern right here in the front, who is a guardian of the ICT. His support for the ICT in the center. A plaque was unveiled on the 3rd floor yesterday for him. The Cyber Terrorism Conference is because of him. And the other gentleman I'll mention, I promise him 50 times a week when I'm here that I won't do it, but I'm going to do it again because he is the #1 bomb expert in the world in history, and that's Mr. Sheikhy Horowitz, former Brigadier General. He has taught LAPD, New York City PD, Australia, Europe, everywhere in the world. If you Google him, he's the #1 guy. His service to this country has been incredible. He's the #1 expert. I think God sent him down here to get rid of all the bombings. Yeah, his name is Sheikhy, but we affectionately call him Shaky. But Sheikhy, again, I want everybody to recognize, especially the students here, folks that don't need you. I had the opportunity in my career to do the Henry Hill Goodfellas case. How many saw the movie Goodfellas? Okay, a few of you. It's 90% accurate, and I'll tell you what terrorists have to do with Goodfellas. Believe it or not, throughout the U.S., we found out through intelligence sources that a lot of the terrorist groups are watching the movie and showing the movie Goodfellas to their fellow terrorists with subtitles. Why would they do that? Well, going back when organized crime was at its heyday in the United States, they use some of the tactics that they use in Goodfellas. American gangs use some of the tactics in it. You couldn't become a made man in the mafia unless they could trace your roots back to Sicily. Had to trace your roots. They did a background check before they brought you into the gang. Same thing is happening with our gangs and terrorists in the U.S., which is very, very difficult to infiltrate them because they check you out. Almost have to submit an application. So it's very, very difficult. We had a gentleman last night, a good friend of mine, Colonel Dika Ilat, an Israeli who was one of the few Israelis who was able to work undercover with terrorists. Very, very difficult to get in. The trust factor, danger off the record. Terrorists are watching Goodfellas to see how to structure and prevent infiltration by law enforcement. Not to be believed, but it's the truth. I had the honor and privilege of meeting President George Bush about 10 years ago. He's responsible for the Patriot Act, which has enhanced the ability of law enforcement in the United States at the risk of violating civil liberties. But what's the choice? What's the choice? I usually start this by saying something about 9/11. And it's kind of a radical saying, but I'll say it anyway. I've said it every year. And I say the worst thing that's happened in the United States is that we have not had a terrorist attack since 9/11. And then people say, oh, this guy's crazy. Obviously, it's the best thing that's happened. But it's caused us to go to sleep in 14 years to a degree. I don't want to criticize TSA or airline security or whatever, but the curve has gone down. It's not the way it was the weeks and months after 9/11. And the longer we go without an attack, we risk the reality of somewhat going to sleep. My youngest son, Brian, is a police officer in New York. I brought him to Israel for the first time. He's in awe of what's going on here. And the last 2 years, he drove me to the airport on his way to work. And that was when we had the Israelis had the problem with Syria and the rocket attacks. And he looked over at me on the parkway and he says, boy, I guess the Israelis are really ramping up. And I said, nah, I doubt it. And he looks at me and almost drives off the road on the parkway. He says, you got to be kidding me. I says, no, they're not ramping up at all. He said, with all the rocket attacks and everything else they're doing, why would they not ramp up? I said, they never ramp up because they never ramp down. The Israelis get it. They're at this level all the time. You talk to anybody in Israeli security, police, government, intel, Shin Bet, they never ramp down. They're always up here because their survival as a nation depends on it. But in Western parts of the world, and even a little bit sometimes in the UK and Europe, when nothing happens, you get to relax, and the relax mode is deadly for us. We also had last night a police meeting, a police forum. And right at the end, I'll just tell you the resolve of the Israelis. You can tell I love the Israelis. Towards the end of our meeting last night, a young Israeli soldier came in. And his right arm, and I don't mean to be dramatic, but I'm going to tell you because it means a lot. From here down, he lost not too long ago with a bomb explosion, with an attack. And he had a prosthetic arm with the hook on it. His other hand, he lost almost all his fingers and half of his hand. So we applauded him, as we should have done. And here's his story. Do you know what he's doing now? He's fighting with the Israeli army to be reinstated to full duty. He's fighting them to do it. We had the same thing happen with a U.S. Special Forces soldier that lost his leg almost up to his thigh. And he wanted to go back on full duty. The U.S. Army, the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, can you go back full duty? So what he set out to do, he was in great shape to begin with, is to be able to outrun, outfight, out-exercise, outperform everybody in his entire division. He took it to the White House and says, I want to be put back. There's nobody that's in my division, and I love them all, that's missing most of their leg. He says, but I can do what they can do, and I can do it better, and I'm number one at it, and I'm the fastest runner.